Hey, Inspired Tribe, how's it going? It's Jean Nolan here, and today's guest for our Inspired Conversation is Dr. Mercola, founder of the #1 natural health news site. We're welcoming him back on the channel. We're going to go deep into some nutritional myths and how to solve them. We're also going to talk about this thing in exercise and workouts that most people completely underestimate and that could potentially change and save your life. And yes, we're also going to discuss a certain treatment that a lot of people have received over the past years and what they could potentially do about it. But first, with all that's happening in the world right now, it's no wonder you want to prepare. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen next, and that's why you need the certainty of gold and silver in your investments. Precious metals will keep you safe from inflation and financial turmoil. And this month, for every qualified IRA, you'll get an incredible 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin completely free as a thank you. You know what to do. Call 877-646-5347 now to find out more, or visit noblegoldinvestments.com. Again, that's noblegoldinvestments.com. Hey, Inspired Tribe, how's it going? It's Jean Nolan here. And we're so excited and grateful to welcome a special friend of the Inspired channel back. Dr. Mercola is the founder and CEO of the #1 health.
No, I'm not the CEO. I am not a CEO.
Okay, the founder of the #1 health website in the world, Mercola.com. Thank you so much for taking the time today, Doc. We appreciate having you on.
Oh, you're most welcome.
After our first conversation, there were a lot of questions that came in. And believe it or not, out of all the topics we discussed, one thing came up. That's probably the #1. #2 is something completely different. But #1 was when you talked about plant-based oils in cooking and eating. And, we got a ton of questions and emails from people and saying, okay, what do I substitute it with? I love olive oil. Can I still eat it? Is avocado oil safe? So, you know what? I didn't know this is going to be the biggest topic, but I do want to start with this. Can you give us more guidance? Because people were freaking out about it.
Well, and I apologize. That was my error, because normally I include that. I typically go through a PowerPoint presentation. It's one of the slides. I just neglected to mention it because obviously, if I'm able to convince people this is something they need to change, then they need to know what to change to. And I neglected to include that. So my deep apologies for not sharing that. So again, let me summarize for those who didn't see it the first time, is that you really want to avoid the seed oils, primarily because it has a very dangerous fatty acid called linoleic acid. Dangerous because almost everyone consumes up to 10 times more than they need. And if you have it in the right amounts, it's not dangerous. It's safe and effective, just like the vaccine. No, not really. But it's not only safe, but it's very vital for your health. It's what's called an essential fat. But the thing is, unlike many minerals and vitamins that are somewhat challenging to get enough of. Magnesium would be a classic one. Almost 90% of people are deficient in magnesium. So they most likely benefit from a supplement, but no one needs an omega-6 fatty acid supplement. So if they tell you otherwise, I would run the other way. Because if you're eating food, it's in almost every bit of food that you eat. So you're not going to become deficient. The issue is excess. And when you get too much, it's going to create something called oxidative stress. And that is when you just have too many electrons floating around that causes free radicals. These free radicals are highly destructive when they're created in your cellular spaces, and they typically knock out your DNA or sections of your DNA, your cell membranes, stem cells, mitochondria, and they lead to most all chronic degenerative diseases and premature aging. So it's definitely something you want to minimize. One of the most important things you can do. So having said that as a base, what are they? So the most common forms of seed oils would be the obvious seed oils like canola. A lot of people think canola oil is healthy, but it's not. It's like in Whole Foods, and they have no clue of this, or they are just oblivious to the fact. And use it in their buffets and in many of the foods that they prepare. So you cannot just going into Whole Foods, you think, oh, I'm doing good, I'm eating at Whole Foods. No way. You have to be hyper diligent and you have to look at it. And Whole Foods is a good example of almost any restaurant that's preparing your food in advance. You can almost be guaranteed, virtually certain, that they're using these seed oils to prepare your food and cook it or put a salad dressing on. So you've really got to create your own dressing. Or if you're in a restaurant, you have to talk to the chef or your server and make sure that the person who's preparing the food uses the substitute. So what is the substitute? The primary one, especially when cooking, is butter. Butter is the best. So that is your go-to. Obviously, you can't use it for everything. So how am I going to use butter in my salad dressing? Well, I am not a big fan of avocado oil or olive oil, and I'll save why in a moment. But what you could use is avocados. Just cut up some whole avocados and put them in your salad, and that's going to give you more than enough fat and texture to make you very satisfied. And I used to eat about an avocado a day, but I cut back because if you have a lot of avocados, that's relatively high in linoleic acid too, but it's only like 2.5 grams. And if you have a low intake otherwise, that's more than acceptable, because you probably should be between, I would say, under 10 grams a day, but probably closer to 5 or 7, depending on how many calories you're eating, is probably more ideal. So the reason why olive oil and avocado oil are problematic is that the majority of them are adulterated. Mm-hmm. Because of really high quality olive oil. You have to understand how this olive oil is produced or made. It might be the better choice of terms, because you have to harvest the olives. Literally, there's like a 2-day window. And if you don't, I mean, out of the whole year, 2 days to harvest. And then so you've got to get that timing down. It's very, very labor intensive. After you have the olives harvested, you have to press them. and you've got to do it within hours. So if you don't get all of these timings right, you're going to have rancid olive oil. So most all commercial olive oil isn't that good. Now you can go to specialty stores from some really high-end places and you can get really great olive oil. They do it the right way. They know how, they've been doing it for centuries, and they've got that thing nailed down. But 80% of olive oil and avocado oil are adulterated with these cheap seed oils. So they put in safflower, sunflower oil. So you're not getting the real deal. But even if you had the best olive oil, I still wouldn't go overboard with it. It's not a magic bullet. And you don't want to have, I would say the limit is a tablespoon a day. So you can put that in your salad, you'd just be fine. Because it's hard to know how much linoleic acid in there is, because it's such a wide range in the species. It could be as low as 3%. It could be as high as 25%. Depends on the olive tree. So you'd have to do a linoleic acid analysis. So you just assume there's in there. And if you wanted to go 2 tablespoons, you could, and you might luck out that you got a low linoleic acid species, and that's fine. So if you're going to cook, as I said, butter is probably the best. Another alternative is coconut oil. A lot of people don't like the flavor of coconut oil, but if you don't mind it, then that is certainly an option. It's not as good as butter, because butter has other nutrients in it. Coconut oil is pretty much devoid of anything. Like butter has a lot of good vitamin A, and it's vitamin A in the form of what's called retinol, which is the real deal vitamin A. Many times, and many lay publications just confuse the heck out of this today. And even on the nutritional label, you can have a plant-based food, and it'll say vitamin A, and it'll give you the units. But there's no vitamin A in plants. It just doesn't exist in plants. It's only in animal food. So it's beta carotene in plants, but it's frequently confused with vitamin A. And many people have an impaired ability to transition that beta carotene to vitamin A. And vitamin A is really important. It's almost as important as vitamin D, especially for immune function. So you want to have a good source, and butter is one of the best. And I know a large portion of your audience are plant-based, mm-hmm. and they may not choose that, and that's fine, but it's really important to get some. I mean, my really good friend is a vegan, but she was a vegan for a long time and almost destroyed her health, but she's converted to the point where she has certain seafoods like mollusk and oysters, and will have cod liver oil, which is if you have it from a good source, there's a lot of bad cod liver oil, but that will give you some good omega-3s, and typically vitamin A if it's a good source. But you got to have vitamin A. It's so important, and your body can't make it. You know, like your body can't make linoleic acid, but if you're eating food, it's not an issue. But most food doesn't have vitamin A unless it's animal based, and that's definitely a big issue for most people. So others, they're pretty much mostly animal based. You know, like beef fat, which is called tallow, would be good. Not all animal fats are that great. Chicken fat or pork fat isn't, largely as a result of the food they're feeding them. Mm-hmm. It's literally a major crime that happened about 50 years ago in the United States. They converted most of the fats that they were giving to the animals from animal-based fats like tallow, which is beef fat, relatively inexpensive, to vegetable fat. You think, well, that's good. Vegetables are good. Well, not really, because vegetable oil, seed oils, that's the crux of the problem. And if you put these seed oils into the animal foods, they're going to have very high levels of it. And that's exactly what they've done with chickens and with pork. So I'm with you on that. I don't eat chicken. I don't eat pork. I raise my own chickens, though. And I give them foods that are very, very low in linoleic acid. So as a result, the eggs have 75% lower linoleic acid. So if you're just getting commercial eggs, even if you're getting organic, free range eggs, they're still going to have significant amounts. So it's still relatively low. Even in my 75% reduced eggs I have 4 a day, that's still the largest portion of linoleic acid in my diet. So, but it's such a powerful nutrient-dense food. The only more nutrient-dense food would be liver, and I know a lot. Certainly, a plant-based person is not going to be going to liver, but it does have vitamin A. It has copper. It's got a lot of minerals. It's loaded with them, and most people only need an ounce or 2 ounces a week. It's not like you have to have a pound of liver a day. Nothing like that. But it's a pretty good food, and even it's good for chickens too. I mean, they do pretty well on a relatively small amount. You know, maybe, I don't know, a few ounces for like 20 or 30 birds. So.
Yeah. And
so does that answer the question?
Well, more than answer the question, which I'm really thankful for, because you already went into the plant-based, which you said that's a good portion of our viewers is definitely plant-based. And I know you mentioned that, like you did now in our previous interview also, that there are certain things that are problematic in a vegan diet.
Well, they're deficient, so you can adjust for and compensate for them, but you have to know that that's an issue going in. If you don't, you're gonna get blindsided almost invariably. I mean, one is B12. You can get blind by B12 deficiency. I mean, there's multiple cases reported in the literature from people choosing a plant-based diet and not getting any source. They weren't supplementing, obviously. If there were something, it wouldn't be an issue. But as long as you know it, you could adjust for it.
And that's my next question. I mean, given that you are the founder, you said not the CEO, but the founder of the #1 health website in the world. What is your suggestion?
Oh, wait. Well, #1 is a subjective impression. So we like to use objective numbers, and it's the most visited natural health site in the world. So, because there's other health sites. It depends on what your definition of a health site is. Like you could include the National Library of Medicine, which is like I think the few hundred Alexa rating, or WebMD, which is totally conventional medical baloney.
Natural health.
Yeah, natural health. But we're the most visited natural health site, and have been for 2 decades. So,
which speaks volumes for the quality. But what would be, and I'm sure you get that question a lot, what is your #1 suggestion in terms of supplements, especially given the fact, and this is something that we have experienced so often, that, as you said, you just even the things that you get from plants, you don't really get because they're so our soil is so
depleted, right?
Depleted, so we don't
primarily because of the farming practices. For a century they've been using the NPK fertilizer, and that's short for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And actually, I think we're looking at some huge problems in the not too distant future, because a big portion of that comes from Russia, and with the sanctions against them, that's radically driving the prices up. It's really tragic that they've resorted to this. It clearly is a way to increase efficiency, but when you use NPK fertilizer and you monocrop everything, you run into a disaster. I mean, you absolutely deplete the soil. And it's just, I mean, you could raise these foods, but they're nutrient depleted in spades. So ideally, I'm a big fan of regenerative agriculture practices. We fund a lot of projects on that and have some really, really big projects going to Mexico to do that, where they're converting desert to lush environments where they're able to feed the animals and produce it. You can do some really elegant things, but you've essentially got to recycle things through the whole environmental process. And if you're bastardizing it with nitrogen fertilizers, it's not going to work. So yeah, it's still a problem even if you're growing your own, but it's much radically increased when you're using synthetic fertilizers.
So you're saying we need supplements, right? If we're plant-based,
let me target the supplement recommendations for plant-based. First, vitamin B12, which is pretty easy to get. You don't need to inject it. If you're going to swallow it, it's best to take it under your tongue. It's called sublingual. They can't tell you to do that because that's a prescription. So the whole system is rigged against you. But know that their sprays can be inserted under the tongue. The reason why you need to do that, vitamin B12 is the largest molecule that we know of. It's just huge. You want to make sure it's methylcobalamin, not cyanocobalamin. The most common B12 is cyano, and cyano is short for cyanide, which is not good in large quantities. Now, admittedly, it's small quantities in the vitamin B12 molecule, but why would you want to take cyanide? And the one that works in your body is methylcobalamin. So make sure it's methylcobalamin, ideally in a sublingual spray, put it under your tongue, and then it goes right into your blood. If you eat B12 in your food or you swallow it, then you're going to have to rely on a glycoprotein that's produced in your stomach called intrinsic factor. And intrinsic factor binds to the B12 and it slides down the intestine to the terminal small intestine, the end of the small intestine, and it absorbed in that area with intrinsic factor. Now, as people get older, they lose the ability to produce this protein. So it's not only vegans or vegetarians that are deficient in B12. In fact, the majority of people are not vegetarians who are. So it's the older you get, the more of an issue it becomes. So it's a really inexpensive supplements, and the consequences of B12 deficiency are not only, they're primarily neurological, but you can also have metabolic things that can increase these molecules like called homocysteine, which can have pretty severe cardiovascular side effects. So B12 is a really good one. It's so inexpensive. It's not terrible, especially if you just, a few sprays under your tongue and you're set. So the other thing, it's the C's. There is something called carnosine, which is actually a dipeptide. It means it has 2 amino acids. It's beta alanine and histidine, and it's found in meat. What is so special about carnosine? Well, it's really important for reducing oxidative stresses, especially as it relates to these linoleic acid, because linoleic acid produces these really bad toxic side effects, and they're called ALEs. Mm-hmm. And that is short for advanced lipoxidation or lipoxidation end products. It's similar to AGEs, and many people may have heard of that. They haven't heard of ALEs, but probably have heard of AGEs, which is advanced glycation end products. But this is the ALEs are actually far worse. And so why am I saying this? Because carnosine actually binds to that molecule like a magnet, and is a sort of a sacrificial sink. It's a substitute target for this really profoundly damaging molecule, side effect of the increasing linoleic acid, and it basically excretes it from your body. So if you don't have enough carnosine, you're going to take the hit from linoleic acid damage until you get it down to real low levels. So that's why it's important. If you're going so you would think, I'll take a carnosine supplement. Well, it's not a good idea, because it's first of all, it's a little bit expensive, but your body doesn't, it breaks it. It's 2 amino acids linked together, beta alanine and histidine. And once you swallow it, your body breaks it apart. It has to break it down to absorb it. So the rate limiting amino acid is beta alanine. So that would be the ideal supplement to take to increase your carnosine levels. So it's called beta alanine, and there's some pretty good ones. Thorne makes a good one. But that we're actually going to come up with one at some point. But yeah, I like that. Carnitine is another one, especially if you're interested in building muscles. It's really profoundly effective, very, very safe. Again, it's an animal product. You don't need these if you're eating large amounts of animal proteins, typically. But if you aren't, then you may want to consider them. I'm thinking of N-acetylcarnitine, which is actually required for functioning in the mitochondria to improve the fat that's coming in, because fat's a really important fuel for the mitochondria to burn. So that facilitates that. And it's really too, as you get older, there is a special type of carnitine called acetylcarnitine that if you take it in large amounts, like a gram or even two grams a day, which is 2,000 milligrams, it's profoundly effective for the memory. So it's something I take regularly. I think I like it. It's a good mitochondrial supplement. And then so there's acetylcarnitine and then regular carnitine. Again, it's available mostly in animal foods, and if you're not, that's something to consider.
I noticed one thing that you've been talking about quite a lot is muscle mass, and especially muscle mass as you grow older. And I think yeah, people understand it's healthy to work out. What is interesting is that especially with recommendations with older age, it's usually more cardio, a lot of walking, a lot of that, but you don't hear ever the really significant importance of muscle mass like you've been emphasizing. What's that all about? And why you basically it's needed to survive.
Yeah, if you're going to a gym and working out when you're traveling, like a hotel fitness center, 90% of the people, I'm sure you've been there and seen this, are on the cardio equipment. They're on the treadmill, they're on the Stairmaster, what's the other one, the bike. Yes, that's better than sitting on the couch, but in my mind, not much better. And I'm admittedly biased and prejudiced because I became fascinated with exercise in 1968, and that's a long way ago. That's 53 years ago. And I've been exercising ever since then, but the first 40 years were almost exclusively cardiovascular. And I got pretty good. I mean, I won some races locally. I was never good at a national level, but I mean, I ran a marathon in like 250. I ran 10 miles under an hour, which is good for me.
That's pretty darn amazing, I'd say.
A mile under 5 minutes, which I could never do again. But so, I mean, I was embraced that, and I just absolutely ignored any type of resistance training. But as you get older, muscle mass is real important. Get to the crux of your question, why it's so critical, because you have 90% of the country who are in a category called they're metabolically inflexible or insulin resistant, or both. 90%, 9 out of 10 people. That contributes to obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, inflammation, arthritis. So one of the ways that you can improve your metabolic flexibility is to have more muscle mass. And why is that? Well, your muscle is the biggest sink in your body for sugar. So when you eat a meal, there are receptors in the cells of your muscles. They're called GLUT4 receptors. And when you eat a meal that has carbohydrates in it, your blood sugar will rise. Well, these GLUT4 receptors are like a magnet. They go right to the muscle. They get inserted into the muscle, and they are converted to glycogen, and they're stored for when your muscle needs it. There's two storage places for glucose in the form of glycogen. One is your liver, which gets circulated around your bloodstream. It goes to your brain. But the ones in the muscle, if you make glycogen in your muscle, it stays in your muscle. You cannot use it in your blood. So it's a big storage factor. So if you have a lot of muscle mass, you're not going to get these high excursions of blood sugar and secondary levels increases in insulin, which is going to contribute to insulin resistance. So it's one of the best ways to treat diabetes is not to be running, but to have muscle mass to control it. And obviously, you have to be careful with your diet too, and not have a lot of linoleic acid, because it's probably the high levels of linoleic acid are more damaging to metabolic flexibility than the high level of carbs. Carbs in moderate amounts are fine. In fact, they're really vital for health. I'm a huge believer in fruits, and I have fruits pretty much every day. I have a mini orchard where I live. And so I'm growing watermelons and mangoes and Japanese plums called loquats. I just harvested 3 gallons of blueberries. Wow. And my favorite is acerola cherries. And have you ever seen an acerola cherry?
I don't know, honestly. If you show it to me, I could tell you, but I'm not sure.
You probably haven't. So they're about the size of a medium-sized gumball.
Mhm.
And how much vitamin C do you think is in one acerola cherry? This big.
Okay, I'll say as much as in 5 oranges.
That's about right. Yeah, that is about right. That was pretty good. Yeah, it's specifically it's 80.
You set me up right. You set me up right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good job. So yeah, it's about 80 milligrams. So you eat 10 of those, and you're getting a gram, or 12, you're getting a gram of vitamin C. And I mean, you could fit 10 in the palm of, or 12 in the palm of your hand easily. So there's no way you can get that with oranges. There's no way. I mean, vitamin C is perceived to be high in oranges. It's got some, it'll help you, but it's not as much as these acerola cherries. And that's important too, because it's probably one of the best ways you can get copper, because there's a specific enzyme in these fruits that have vitamin C high concentrations. It's called tyronase, and tyronase is really high in copper, and almost everyone's deficient in copper. But it doesn't mean you need a copper supplement. You just need to eat foods that are high in copper, and copper is like one of the most important minerals that's ignored. I mean, almost all the minerals are important, especially magnesium. It's magnesium and copper are the two that don't really get enough attention. Magnesium almost always has to be supplemented. Now, that's not because you're a vegan. It's just because almost everyone's deficient in magnesium, and it's not in the food. It's really, really hard. Some people are resistant. I mean, I have tried for years to get mine up, and I haven't been able to do it. So I resorted to actually doing intravenous administration of magnesium, so I can put really high doses in there, because magnesium is so important for just about everything. In fact, when you make your cellular energy, it's in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. But it's not ATP. It's magnesium ATP. That's how it's made. Your body makes it. You need magnesium to make the ATP.
So I got to ask you, I got to jump in here, because a lot of people take magnesium in forms of pills as a supplement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good. Almost everyone needs it. Right.
But as you said you're tolerant, kind of. You didn't really absorb it well. So how do you know unless you measure it?
That's right. You don't. The best test to do that can be taken from any commercial lab like LabQuest or
okay.
LabCorp or Quest, sorry. And that's not a serum magnesium level, but a magnesium RBC level. That's because it's magnesium inside your red blood cells, intracellular magnesium that's really important, not what's in your blood. So because most of it's in the cell. So that's the best way to do it. And your cells turn over like every 3 months, typically. For most people, unless you have a genetic hemolytic anemia like I do, then it's like every 2 months. So that if you're going to do an intervention, it doesn't make any sense to retest until you wait for about 3 months until your red blood cells recycle. So there's a lot of good forms of magnesium. I like magnesium threonate. Magnesium malate is good. It's bound to an amino acid called malic acid is an amino acid, but it's a good one. Magnesium citrate I like too, because one of the dangers. This is probably one of the biggest dangers most vegetarians are aware of, is that there is thinking of the correct term for it. It's like a crystal. It's called the oxalates. Have you heard of oxalates before, John?
Not really. No.
Okay. Well, the most common and well-accepted complication of high oxalates would be a calcium oxalate kidney stone. So they clearly increase kidney stones, but they cause a lot more damage than kidney stones. There is a really high-powered, good nutritionist. Her name is Sally Norton, and she is in the process of writing a book. And she actually asked me to write the foreword to the book. And then she told the publisher, she asked me, and she says, no. This man is kryptonite. He can be writing your introduction. So they banned me from writing her introduction, but she really is knowledgeable and she has an online resource and I've done some interviews with her that are on my BitChute account. BitChute, and just type in Mercola and Norton and you should be able to find it. She talks about and discusses what the damage these things do. And so you really want to have low oxalate foods. It just doesn't help you in any way, shape, or form. It just builds up in your body and can cause a lot of problems and complications. And it's particularly high in vegetables. So one of the reasons why, a lot of vegetables are a problem. So what is it high in? It's high in vegetables and nuts, like almonds are really high. Spinach, kale, these are all perceived as super health foods. But I mean, these high oxalates can kill you. And it doesn't happen commonly, but there are many reported deaths from high oxalate poisoning. Usually I think it's from rhubarb, but they're really exceptionally high ones when they have it. And it's like, whoa, it can cause problems. It interferes with the conduction circuits in the heart. So it can cause fatal arrhythmias. But it causes a lot of annoying symptoms. And I had a problem with it too. I had a rash for 12 years and I couldn't figure it out. And I've access to a lot of good medical diagnosticians.
Say so.
Saw a lot of dermatologists, and no one could figure it out. And finally, after over a decade, nailed it down to high oxalates. And it was just this unbelievable, annoying rash. It was like itching that makes you almost suicidal. You can't sleep at night. That's how bad it was. I almost have to take medication, like lidocaine, a local anesthetic to numb the itching. So, but fortunately, I haven't had it for months now, since I started going on a low oxalate diet. But and I think another one is Swiss chard. And I remember preparing my victory garden for Y2K. I was a prepper back then, and thankfully,
not a prepper anymore.
Well, I mean, 20. Yeah, I've been a prepper since. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I've got electric power backups. I mean, I basically could survive I live in Florida, and I got backup power for at least a year with that service going down. I have satellite internet as a backup. And see, when you have a hurricane, there's not a lot, but there's regular hurricanes in Florida. And the problem of that is they knock out the power system and they say, okay, so you have battery backups, or generators. I've got solar that has batteries, so it's just recycles, and I really don't need to hardly use a generator unless it's a really cloudy day. But the problem with the power going out is the cell towers go down too, and the cell towers actually transmit the internet. Yeah. So if there's no power to the cell towers, you don't have phone service, but you have no internet, which is the worst. So thankfully, Starlink, I mean, they've got the problems because it's 5G and stuff, but at least you can get internet without any electricity because it comes from the sky. So that's a pretty good prep. And I've got a lot of food. I got chickens, got 20 chickens and lots of food that I'm growing. So
yeah, I think I took you out of the thought at Swiss chard because I wanted to hear what you were saying about that, because I love that. I love putting that in, in juices. And
I got real sick from it. And this was 20 years ago because I had so much Swiss chard. I didn't realize that you don't need that many Swiss chard plants, because when you harvest it, it grows right back.
Yeah, exactly.
So I didn't know that. I was a newbie farmer or gardener. And I was getting shopping bags a day of harvesting. I just had so many Swiss chard smoothies, and I got really sick of it. I thought it was a food allergy, but I'm pretty convinced it was the oxalates. But I would be really, really cool. And you can look it up online. There's charts that have the high oxalate foods. So, but almonds are high, and it's, like people will drink almond milk instead of regular milk, but it's really high in oxalates. You have to be very careful. And it's high in linoleic acid too. So almonds are not your friend. You can have 2 or 3 a day, but if you start having handfuls of almonds, you're heading in the wrong direction. And see and I started tangented away from the really important topic that you brought up, which is the muscle mass. I just did an interview. Unfortunately, it's not going to be up by the time this airs, because it's up now, but our articles are only up for 48 hours, and then they're transferred to Substack, and then it's behind a paywall where you have to pay $5 because it's a private membership association. It gives us this legal protection, so in case they come after us. So it's not that we're money hungry. We just have to have some type of structure like that for self protection from the government and these nefarious agencies that want to take me out. So anyway, it'll be on Substack, but you can. I interviewed Gabrielle Lyon, Lyon, and she's a physician, and it's really focused on muscle-centric medicine. And we had a really good discussion on how you build muscle mass. And one of the central themes of that discussion was the need for lots of protein. So it's really hard to get a lot of protein if you're on a vegetarian diet. You can do it. And there are certainly, and I understand there are many people who are bodybuilders and or vegans, and I get it, but it's hard to do. It's hard to do unless you're taking processed foods and supplements and stuff. So the key is to get enough protein. And most people, because you can do the best resistance training exercises But unless you have enough protein, you need that too. You can turn the switch on, but you have to have the body needs the raw materials to actually build the muscle with. You can't build it out of thin air. It's not going to do it from oxygen that you're breathing. You need amino acids to have muscle protein synthesis occur. So, and if unless you're over this threshold, you're not going to activate a really important pathway called mTOR, which is mammalian target rapamycin, that is required to turn on to build muscle. But even if you activate that pathway, you've got to have amino acids to make the muscles. So most people aren't getting enough protein. And I know that becomes somewhat of a challenge because there's this perception that calorie restriction is associated with longevity. It's just associated. That doesn't mean it's causal, but so it is associated, there's no question, but you can achieve the same benefits of calorie restriction by doing something called time restricted eating that we talked about last time, where you restrict the eating window to about 6 to 8 hours.
Which people know is intermittent fasting, basically.
Yeah,
right?
That's another term, which is not quite as technically accurate because intermittent fasting could you mean eat one day and take 2 days off or take a day off and alternate. So time restricted eating is a very specific, is really well understood within the medical community or the health medical community that it's about a 6 to 8 hour eating window. So, I mean, you can go to 10, but it's definitely less than 12. No question. I mean, 10, I don't know they're going to as many benefits, but 6 to 8 hours. I think going under that, I mean, there's some people who do something called OMAD, which is 1 meal a day. So it's like a 2 hour eating window or even an hour. And I think that's pushing. If you got some competition you're seeking to do or something, it's probably okay. But as a general principle, I wouldn't go much under 6 hours for most anyone.
I'll be honest with you. After our last conversation, and this is something you said triggered something that I've already felt coming up for a while. I think I was thinking about fish, salmon in particular, for a while, even before our conversation. And so I realized that my body was telling me something. And so I had salmon a couple of times and must say I feel really good. So I've been kind of implementing fish into my diet again, which honestly had a great effect on everything in my body. Like I just feel
better. It's an animal food.
I know.
Plus it's got but you have the devil's in the details. Okay. Most people know Tony Robbins. I'm actually interviewing him at his home next week. And he got into real big problems. He talks about it in his most recent book, I think Life Force, where he just wound up eating a lot of swordfish and tuna, which are notoriously high in mercury. And he almost died from it. He had one of the highest ever low mercury levels. So you have to get clean fish. Normally, you want to get wild Alaskan salmon would be the best. It's pricier, but it's going to be relative. Very
what I had before we jumped on this call, Doc. That's exactly what I had today.
Oh, good. And then you listen to your body. Your body knows the best, right? So, if you can abandon everything I'm saying, if it doesn't make you better, you got to recalibrate, because your body is the ultimate arbiter of the health truth for you. But, I've been around for a while and I've seen many people, and I know many people who've gone disasters because they didn't integrate animal food in their diet. You can do that successfully, but it's really, really hard. And I would never disagree with someone for ethical reasons. You can't. I mean, you're beyond foolish if you think you can. You can't argue ethically. There's no argument. If you believe that, it's fine. Case closed. But if you're doing it for health reasons, that's something different.
It was honestly both, and I think for a lot of our viewers, it's the same. The thing is, as we evolve and learn, we get different perspectives or sometimes greater perspectives. And I'm sure I'm going to talk about that in a separate live stream or whatnot. While we have you on, I honestly, this would have been the second question, but I had to move it back because I know now we're going to get in territory that's going to get us in trouble. So that's why I put it in the back end of the interview. So one of the questions, obviously, that people have asked us a lot is around vaccines, around the side effects, around the long-term effects, which we, of course, don't even know yet. But I know you are part of this illustrious group. You guys meet some of the best minds in the world. I know you're a part of it. You told me, I think Dr. Peter McCullough and Dr. Malone and I think Bobby Kennedy Jr., and I know you're discussing probably subjects like these. Can you let us into a little bit of what the current ideas are of what we could do or people can do that maybe had the treatment. That's been one of the main questions here. Or, what's the latest on this?
Well, I think there's a universal consensus of those who have carefully studied this and have not been essentially brainwashed that one of the most important things you can do.
Unfortunately, this is where we had to cut off, but we created and are creating a community on the Locals platform, the Inspired community, where we have unfiltered, uncensored, unapologetically free content. And so you can watch the full interview with Dr. Mercola there free of charge. You just sign up on our Locals Inspired community and you get to enjoy the full episode. The doc is sharing a lot more, going into depth about very important topics that matter to you and me and our families. So please sign up and check out the full interview on the Inspired community on Locals.